Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that has sliced and diced its way through Jason X 13 minutes at a time. We are back for one more bonus episode, and I'm Brian.
I'm Greg.
So, Greg, we have reached episode X of this franchise. What are your thoughts on Jason X?
I alluded to this, I think, in the first episode of this season. I stick up for this movie. It's not like it's a masterpiece. It's not like it's a classic of cinema or anything like that. But I think it gets a bad rap. And I think even the people who made it have had some less than enthusiastic memories of how it turned out. They kind of badmouth it a little bit in both the book and documentary Crystal Lake Memories. And that's fair. I mean, it might not have lived up to what they were hoping to achieve. But I think it's better than they give it credit for. And I think the reason I respect this movie is that, you know, the idea of Jason in space is inherently silly and stupid. You know, obviously it's kind of become a cliche, you know, starting with Hellraiser and Leprechaun, you know, Jason in space, and is now like such a widely known, you know, when a franchise has nowhere else to go, they go to space. And that's why people are going to be disappointed if Fast and the Furious 9 doesn't have a mid-credits scene of the gang taking an exit ramp to Cape Canaveral in Florida because they want Part 10 to be in space. But, you know, leaving that aside, aside the idea being very silly inherently, this, with the limitations they faced, I feel like this was as good a Jason in space movie as you were ever going to get. I don't feel like they phoned this one in at all. I don't think they were necessarily able to do everything they wanted to do. And, you know, yeah, the effects have aged poorly and stuff. But, you know, you look at, by comparison, Jason Takes Manhattan. That was not a satisfying film to be titled Jason Takes Manhattan. Jason Goes to Hell, a very dissatisfying movie for the title Jason Goes to Hell. This is Jason in space, and you know they do some new things with the franchise. You know, however successful they may have been, you get a cyborg Jason. You know, they kind of give you everything they promised, and it has its flaws, but I have a fondness for it because they gave it their best, and there's some funny, clever stuff in this movie. So I like it more than it probably deserves. But, yeah. What about you?
What I love about this franchise is that despite Jason Goes to Hell, despite Jason X, we keep coming back for more. There are TV shows that I've watched for years that have had one bad season, or bands that I love that have had one bad album, and I'm just like, I'm done. But for whatever reason, I keep coming back to Jason. And again, despite Jason Goes to Hell, I could have very easily just been like, you know what? I am fucking done with this Friday the 13th crap. But I came back, and Jason X is a flawed movie, to be sure, but it's enjoyable. And I think I enjoyed it the most this time around than I ever have. It was entertaining. And like you said, it really captures what it intended to do. You know, it's like, I think the premise of the movie is fine. I like the idea that he was captured and they were going to freeze him until they could figure out what to do with him. And it went wrong and they ended up in space. Like, sure, if you unpack it a little bit too much, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But as far as this movie's concerned, like, I was going along with it. I'm like, sure, okay, that works. Let's just keep going. And it just made for an entertaining movie. And I think they made some characters that were likable and distinct that made me want to care about them. Sure, there's a bunch of, like the military grunts that kind of show up that are just disposable just to add to the body count, and that's fine. But the main characters I really enjoyed, and I was invested in them. There are certain things I wish they had done better. The fact that Uber Jason shows up so late in the movie is a little disappointing. I would have liked to have seen him revealed earlier in the movie and shown to have had more abilities or strengths that we didn't necessarily get to see, whether it was, weapons that came out of his armor or things like that. Just, I feel like
or a laser sword or something that, yeah.
Yeah, just something that made him more than just like a cosmetic upgrade. That, basically was just wearing body armor, and that's fine. But if you're going to make a robotic Jason, let's go all the way with this. Let's not hold back.
Yeah, thermal vision or something like that. Yeah.
The VR camp scene I thought was an interesting twist. Again, I would have liked to have seen that implemented a little bit more effectively. It's very much a throwaway scene, but I think they could have done it for a more prolonged period of time and made it effective. And like you just said about the thermal vision, like that would be a cool scene. It was kind of like a Predator type thing where he's going around these virtual cabins and he can't find them, and then he pushes a button on the side of his helmet and it turns into thermal vision. And we're like, oh shit, now he can see behind walls. Like that could have been fun. And I'm sure a lot of it was budgetary, that they couldn't do everything that they wanted. But at least we got Jason in this movie. We sure as hell didn't get Jason in the previous one. And even though Jason Goes to Hell tried something different and failed miserably, Jason X just showed that you could try something different, totally, completely, absurd, and still have it work. And I think the reason why they made it work was because they remembered what the core of a Friday the 13th movie is, which is Jason hunting down victims, not, demon worms and magical daggers.
Yeah, I mean that's very true. The biggest problem with this movie is not even the movie's fault. It's not scary at all, but the franchise kind of stopped even trying to be scary by this point. So at no point is it creepy or atmospheric, but they weren't intending it to be. I don't think. So I don't even really hold that against it. It's like you say, it's just kind of enjoyable. There's some good wit, and I mean, like, the first couple times I saw it, it maybe didn't really live up to my expectations, but I agree. This time watching it, I kind of enjoyed it more than I ever have before. And I mean, I remember we first learned about this movie all the way back. You and I were standing in line at Blockbuster Video renting something one evening, and there was a magazine rack right by the checkout counter, and there was a picture of Jason in this metal hockey mask on the front that said Jason in Space, and we were like, wait, what? This was probably like 1999 or something. I'm not sure it had even been shot yet, and so we hadn't heard about it. We say this a lot, but this was back when the internet was still kind of in its infancy, and we weren't as tapped into projects and development and rumors and stuff. And so we were both like, oh, holy shit, that's awesome. Even though it's, Jason in Space is stupid, like, great. We were so excited. And then, it wound up on the shelf at New Line for a couple of years. And so we were waiting all that time, are they ever going to release it? What's going on? And then finally, it got a date, and we started, seeing the trailer, which had that awesome song Bodies by Drowning Pool, and kind of showed some of the highlight moments, and we were like, oh, this could be fun as shit. And then we saw opening night, so we were all in.
The crazy thing to think of is that Jason X is really the end of the original Friday the 13th era, because I don't really view Freddy versus Jason as a Friday the 13th movie. It's very much a standalone thing.
Right.
So this is kind of like the last of the original Friday the 13th movies, and it happens in outer space.
Yeah. Agreed. It's the end of the original timeline, so that section of Friday the 13th canon ends 455 years in the future, and then we have Freddy versus Jason, which I kind of consider to be apocryphal, and then the reboot. So unless they somehow someday go back and insert something into the original timeline somehow, This is it.
You had mentioned that we saw this on opening day, and that is notable because it was also how I kicked off my bachelor party. I would like to think that the timing was coincidental, but knowing you and I'm sure it was deliberate. I got married on May 18th. The movie came out on April 26th of 2002. So we were probably trying to time my bachelor party, closer to the wedding, sometime in April. And, there was, half a dozen of us at least that were going. And we probably looked at the calendar and, had a few available dates in April and saw that one of them was the release date of Jason X. And you and I were just like, fuck everyone else. This is when we're having my bachelor party.
I'm pretty sure that's how it worked out. It was just fortuitous timing, but once we saw the opportunity arise, that was sort of fate. We knew that is how we needed to kick things off.
So my bachelor party was in the the epicenter of bachelor party events, Indianapolis, Indiana. And we did that because I was and still do live in Chicago. And, Greg was in Cincinnati, and then I had friends that were going to be attending my bachelor party and brothers that were kind of scattered all around the area. And so Indianapolis was a nice central location. So that Friday night, you, Greg, and I arrived with one of my friends from Chicago, and then you brought one of our mutual friends from Cincinnati. And that was sort of the event that kicked it off, like before everyone else showed up on Saturday for the main events of the bachelor party. So it was just the four of us in the theater that night. And they were really just held hostage because it was my bachelor party and this is what I wanted to do. And they were certainly reluctant participants, but you and we had a lot of things planned for that weekend, but in a weird way, this was what I was looking forward to the most. So I just love that Jason X will, be forever tied to, the ramp up to my wedding.
Yeah, that certainly adds a lot of my fondness to this movie because it was such a significant event, tied in with such a significant event in your life. And, the laughter of that moment in the theater. But it was a great kickoff to the weekend, and a couple of other fun memories that I have of that weekend were the next day we did some go-kart racing with your brothers and everybody, and then we did a paintball course. And I do remember one moment where I had been hit by somebody with a paintball, and I had marched toward the reset area down this hallway and came back into the arena, and the very moment I stepped foot back into the combat zone, you shot me in the neck, and I had to turn around and go all the way back, and I was just so defeated by that moment. So thank you for shooting me in the neck, Brian.
Yeah, point blank range too.
Yeah, it was you were poaching, I think. And then the other memory that I laugh at and mentioned just the other day, in fact, is, as many bachelor groups do, we went to a strip club late that evening. And I remember one guy in this strip club in Indianapolis who was wearing a sleeveless white T-shirt and a backwards, upside-down, clear plastic visor on his head, dry humping a stripper from behind, looking like he thought he was the king of the world, kind of gazing around the audience like, yeah, look at me, man. And she had the most bored, annoyed look on her face. It was hilarious.
Back to some thoughts about the movie and wishing that they had, kind of taken certain things a little bit further. I did this time think that there was a possibility or an interesting opportunity to set a Jason movie on Earth 2, where everything is just turned a little bit on its head. Like, It looks like Earth, but there's going to be things about it that are different that reveal itself throughout the movie. And so we've got, whether it's Uber Jason or actual Jason on this planet that's going to look very familiar to him. And there's going to be people that look like normal people, but maybe those people can fly, or, maybe they have some sort of powers. Just little things that would kind of like reveal as the movie went on that showed that this was not, the location that you think it is. So I think there's some cool possibilities there. It would get probably pretty ridiculous, but I mean, let's be honest. We just finished a movie where Jason was flying through outer space. So I would have been on board with it. But this was the first time where when I saw them, flying through the Earth 2 atmosphere and then landing in Lake, I was like, it would have been kind of cool to kind of just set like an alternate reality version of a Friday the 13th movie on a different planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I thought exactly the same thing, even back at the time. Like, this is a neat way to kind of reset the clock and, pick up a new direction from scratch that can be as familiar or unfamiliar as you want it to be. They might have hoverboards or some other kind of Back to the Future 2 type shit, but, obviously they're still camping. So, they could have really gone in with a clean slate. And, it's kind of too bad that it fizzled out from here.
This is probably a good time to bring up Kane Hodder, since this is his last appearance as Jason Voorhees. We've touched on him throughout the previous seasons and, shared some thoughts, but I feel like this is the time to get everything out. Let's talk about Kane and, what he did to the franchise and to the role of Jason. And
yeah, I mean, I've had mixed opinions of Kane's portrayal of Jason over the years, primarily because the movies that he plays Jason in haven't been the best in the series necessarily, none of which is his fault. But, in some ways, his Jason suffers by what he is surrounded with. And I disagree with a couple of things that Kane, who is rightly very protective of the character, feels in his portrayals. He's gone on record saying that Jason should never have to run to catch a victim. And I think Jason is scarier when he does run. Kane sometimes, I think, plays Jason a little bit too much like the Terminator or kind of this unstoppable juggernaut. But it's a valid approach. And I mean, the guy kicks ass at it. So, if I disagree with that, tough shit. I mean, he's the one playing Jason, for God's sake. And I think it's a shame that he didn't get to go beyond this, particularly for Freddy versus Jason. We'll get into that whole thing next season, but even just on a financial participation basis, I think the guy fucking earned it. And it's a shame that he was cut out of the running for doing it one last time. And I mean, he's the kind of guy that I would love to sit next to on a plane. It sounds like he's a cool guy, at least, to fans, and loves the fact that he was in these movies. He's kind of embraced the horror genre wholeheartedly and gone on to, play Victor Crowley, which is another, semi-iconic role in the genre. I did see that he plays a part in a horror movie called Old Habits Die Hard, which I was disappointed to learn is not about John McClane fighting terrorists in a convent for retired nuns. But Kane did get to come back and mocap for Jason in the Friday the 13th, the game, and it was fun to kind of see him as all of the Jasons, from part 2, part 4, whatever, and you can kind of identify it as Kane in the game, and it's good that he got to do that, at least. I like a lot of what he did bring to the role, and he was responsible for, or at least he helped make Jason even more of a household name, or he became so inextricably tied to the character that he became kind of a household name, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. So, I wish he'd been in some scarier ones, and I think he might even agree with that. But he was great, and I'm glad we got him 4 times.
Yeah, I think he's a great Jason. I don't know if he's my favorite, but that's more just because of the criteria that I use to determine that. So like I tend to go first by appearance, what does Jason look like? And what do they do? That's kind of the first thing that I look at. And then obviously the movie that they're in plays a role in that. But unfortunately, like that's not the actor's problem, So like I'm not going to discredit Jason in Jason Goes to Hell because of Kane Hodder's performance. It's because of the movie itself. So
right.
Overall, I think Kane does a really, really good job as Jason. And just unfortunately, he was in some movies that just weren't that great and he didn't have a whole lot to do. But I certainly have nothing wrong with any of his performances. There's, again, some of the appearances that he took on, especially in like Jason Goes to Hell, where he was just so hulking and massive. It just became too much of a monster. And that's not what I want to see in a Jason. I want to see someone that's more primal, that, lives in the woods and kills people that get in his way, not some unstoppable beast.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not Kane Hodder had, influence on those appearances, I don't know, but that's when it's kind of started to lose me. But I would have zero problem with him being Jason in every Friday the 13th moving forward, because I think he did such a great job and he deserved it. So I do hope that he gets an opportunity to put the hockey mask on one more time and really, get, the Jason movie that we all deserve with Kane as Jason. And like you said, he absolutely seems like an awesome guy. I just watched his documentary To Hell and Back, and there are some stories that he tells in there that are absolutely gut-wrenching about, things that he went through in his past, everything from being bullied to a stunt gone wrong that, resulted in some serious burns and just a horrible path that he had to go through to recover from those burns. And hearing him talk about it, it's just brutal. It's really, really hard to listen to. But he does a really good job of shaping how those experiences have turned him into the person that he is today, and how, he takes out some of those aggressions, by playing these characters and doing these violent kills. And it's certainly better than doing it in the real world and taking out your aggressions in other ways. So, but he seems like a great guy that loves the franchise. He wants the best for the franchise. He's not afraid to speak up and say, hey, that movie wasn't the greatest, or I could have been better in that, or, I wish we could have done this. So I respect that he has so much respect for the franchise, because that's what you want in someone that's going to be a recurring character in these movies. So yeah, I really do hope he gets another shot at playing Jason.
Yeah, surely there is no more enthusiastic supporter of the character and the franchise. I mean, I would even say not even Sean Cunningham can match Kane Hodder's energy when he's out promoting the character, the history, the series. And, like I haven't watched any of those bonus features yet, but I definitely want to. And in fact, I really want to go back and I never did read his autobiography, Unmasked, the true life story of the world's most prolific cinematic killer. But I think I'm gonna, learning that he grew up on Quaj, and, hearing that, he was bullied as a kid and has gone on to do what he's done. I'm a lot more fascinated by learning about his life.
As far as trivia for this movie is concerned, when you start to hear the backstory of the development, you start to understand how and why they ended up with Jason is in Space. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were waiting for Freddy vs. Jason to come out. The idea had been around for a long time, but they couldn't quite land on a story that worked. And so as that development was going on, there was this need and desire to make a one-off Friday the 13th movie, but they didn't want it to interfere with the potential Freddy versus Jason movie that was going to come out sometime later. And the best way that they could do that was setting the movie in the future, so it wouldn't interfere with any kind of continuity. They would just assume that this would always just take place after Freddy versus Jason whenever it did come out. So once they started thinking about Jason in the future, they made the logical jump to Jason in space. And they originally conceived an idea that was more Blade Runner-esque, that would take place in a futuristic city with lots of people, which obviously has a lot of potential, but from a budgetary standpoint, was going to be a nightmare. So they decided to basically steal the structure of Alien and Aliens and make it space cowboys on a ship. They also didn't want to connect it too closely or at all to Jason Goes to Hell because, quite frankly, they couldn't figure out how to get Jason out of hell. So they just wanted to abandon the idea completely and just come up with their own concept, which is why we see him in that, examination lab at the beginning of Jason X, and we don't really know how he got there. It's because they just didn't want to back themselves into a corner or over-explain things too much, which is fine. I'm not going to, argue that. We mentioned that it came out on April 26, 2002, but that is just one of 32 different release dates across the world that this movie had, starting in Germany on July 24th, 2001, and ending in Italy on June 25th, 2004. So they had some serious issues getting this movie out.
Yeah, and another big problem was that it sat on the shelf for so long that online pirates got their hands on it and were distributing it illegally via, BitTorrent and stuff. So I have to imagine that cut into its box office quite a bit because, there's probably a limited number of people in the world who were going to see Jason in space anyway. And if they got their hands on it and could watch it at home, a year, 2 years before the theatrical release, why are they going to pay money to see it on the big screen?
The budget for Jason X was reportedly $11 million, which is interesting because it's more than double the highest budget for any of the other movies. The previous high was Jason Takes Manhattan at $5 million. And we discussed that I think that they really put everything they had into this movie from a special effects standpoint and from a development of the sets. I thought the sets were pretty impressive. And not surprisingly, the movie did not do all that hot at the box office. It did make $6.6 million opening weekend, thanks to you and I, Greg. But it disappeared very, very quickly after that and ended up only grossing $13.1 million. So it was, to date, the least successful of the Friday the 13th movies.
Yeah, I mean, it struggled from the get-go. I mean, it opened number 3 that week behind the Ben Affleck saga Changing Lanes and the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson vehicle Scorpion King. I remember that Monday looking at the returns and thinking like, oh, that actually isn't too bad. 6.6 million, oh, good for them. But then it tanked almost immediately because I think the following weekend, Spider-Man opened. And so that just basically killed everything else at the box office. What amazes me is that in the span of less than a month, you and I saw 3 movies together despite living 300 miles apart, starting off with Jason X. Then the following weekend, you drove to Cincinnati for some pre-wedding things, and we saw Spider-Man opening night. And then a couple of days before your wedding itself, it was the opening of Star Wars: Attack of the Clones. And so you were in town, and we met up there, and that kind of kicked off your wedding weekend.
Yeah, what a great kickoff to that weekend.
Boof. Started strong and ended poorly.
I just remember because we drove from Chicago and drove straight to the theater and met you there. And I don't think that was the original plan, but I got stuck in traffic. And so we were running late and we had no choice but to meet you at the theater. And I was just hauling ass on the highway. I was like, we got to be there. We can't be late to see Attack of the Clones. And showed up like minutes before, the lights went down in the theater. And then at the end of the movie, just thinking, that really wasn't worth all that trouble I put myself through.
No, I mean, I remember, looking at your face at the end of the movie as we were leaving the auditorium, and it was like looking into a mirror. We were both so disgusted by what we had just seen.
Taglines for this movie are, "This Halloween, meet the perfect 10 in terror." We saw it nowhere near Halloween.
Jason's hot? What?
Another one was, "Welcome to the future of horror." And then another variation of that one was, "Welcome to the future of horror. He's been drowned, chainsawed, knifed, axed, hammered, shocked, burned, spiked, nailed, shot, and frozen. Now he's back for more."
I'm already bored.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And then the last one is my favorite, which is "Evil Gets an Upgrade," which is pretty great. I also went back and watched the trailer because, we always, the season kicked off with the Drowning Pool song "Bodies," or at least us making fun of it. But so I went back and watched the trailer because that's where I originally heard that song, and cracked up when I saw that the voiceover was done by none other than Optimus Prime himself, Peter Cullen. "I am Optimus Prime, and this is Jason X."
It begins with the cube.
Yeah. "I'm calling out to people of Earth 2.
I thought Jason was made of sterner stuff.
And lastly, I'll leave you with a quote from Roger Ebert's review of Jason X. "I left the movie knowing one thing for sure. There will be a Jason XI, or, given the IQ level of this series, Jason X Part 2. So I think that brings the Season X to an end, unless you have anything else, Greg.
No, I think we better start gearing up for Brian versus Greg.
I know we've said this on previous seasons, but I am confident this time that this is the last time, Greg, that you and I will have to record our season virtually. I think the next time when we get together for Freddy versus Jason, we will be doing so in person, and I may or may not be wearing pants.
If you want to ensure that I have a pantsless recording session with Brian, please, take a moment and rate and review this podcast wherever you listen, whether it's on Apple Podcast apps or Spotify or wherever you happen to hear it. That helps us out a lot and will spread the word. We're very grateful for the audience that we've built so far, but we're always happy to have more. So whatever you can do to help us out, we'll appreciate, and we look forward to being back next time.
Yeah, we've got some great engagement with some listeners on like Facebook and Instagram. So continue to reach out to us there. It's always fun to hear your thoughts and, concerns about the franchise overall and just engaging with people in between seasons. So don't be afraid to do that. But yeah, definitely give us a shout out or, rate us whenever you have a chance. And we will be back soon with Freddy versus Jason. So until then, I've been Brian.
I've been Greg.
And you're all doomed.